Hey, what's going on, AP guys? We have a review video today on the Articles of Confederation. So everything you need to know about the Articles of Confederation to do well on the APUSH exam. And this has been an essay topic in the past. It's been a couple years since the AP exam has asked about the Articles of Confederation, so you never know. Could potentially be an essay topic, so I would be sure to be familiar with everything in this video and more. Okay, let's do a little brief background on the Articles. And what was it? Well, it was simply the government prior to the Constitution. It lasted from 1781 to 1789. And some of the main ideas of the Articles are one, it had a very, very weak central government. And the thing to keep in mind is the Americans now who lived under the British as colonists, they want to be anti-Britain. They want to make sure that their government is pretty much the opposite of what the British government was like. So they were afraid of a strong central government. And it simply was a confederation of states. So each state had a lot of power, and it was almost like each state was its own little country. Okay, weaknesses and positives we're going to talk about. Definitely know both of these. And the weaknesses, sadly, there are plenty for the Articles of Confederation. There was no executive branch, again, because of King George III. The Americans feared having a strong executive branch, so they eliminated it. It was very difficult to pass laws. Out of the 13 states, 9 of them must have voted yes in order for a law to become a law. Whereas today, under Congress, it's simply more than 50% of the House and 51 senators have to vote on it. One vote per state, regardless of size, in the legislative branch. So, really tiny Rhode Island had as much power as largely populated Virginia. It was virtually impossible to amend the articles or change them. All 13 states must agree before that could happen, and that was a very difficult task. A huge issue, as we'll see again in a couple minutes, is that each state could have its own currency. So imagine 13 different states, 13 different currencies. I live in Buffalo, New York, and right about 30 minutes from me is Canada. If I want to go to Canada, I have to exchange currency. It's not that big of a deal, but I often travel to Ohio to go to Cincinnati. As I pass from New York, go through Pennsylvania and into Ohio, that could be 3 different currencies that I could be using. And it's a big pain. It would be a big pain in the butt. And a huge weakness was that there was no national army. And that's going to come back to haunt them. Some of the strengths, 2 of these you must know, these do appear quite frequently. The first one is the Land Ordinance of 1785, which sold land in what was then the West, or today the Midwest, modern day Ohio, Michigan, etc. And this also divided townships into 36 square miles, or 6 by 6 miles, and the 16th square went towards public education. So here's the Northwest Territory. Again, we have Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and even some of present-day Minnesota. And you would look at this township here, and each one went from 1 all the way up to 36. This 16th section right here would be reserved for public education. And so the land ordinance sells land out in the West. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, 2 years later, takes this a step further, and it defined the process for admitting new states. Specifically, once a territory hits 60,000 people, it could apply for a state. So remember it this way: the land ordinance sells the land. Once people get to that land, the Northwest Ordinance allows that area to become a state. And one of the most notable things from the Northwest Land Ordinance of 1787 is it outlawed slavery in the Northwest Territories. So slavery was forbidden there. We have 2 major economic challenges under the Articles, and again, as I mentioned earlier, one, each state could coin its own money, which would discourage trade, could lead to different values, and a huge thing, each state could impose tariffs on other states. So Maryland here, this guy from Pennsylvania is trying to sell his goods to Maryland. Maryland is basically slapping a toll or a tariff or a tax onto it, and this would also discourage trade. It made it very difficult for the economy to prosper. Okay, a couple domestic challenges you need to know. And the first one is the Newburgh Conspiracy, which happened in 1783. And this was a plan by some high-ranking military officials. They wanted to pose a challenge to the government. They were upset with the government. They basically wanted to lead a mini rebellion. And this was stopped by George Washington here. He convinced them not to lead this. More importantly, and Shays' Rebellion shows up all the time in the APUSH exam, this is a very important rebellion. It is led by Daniel Shays. Here he is. He was a war veteran, and in Massachusetts, this was an uprising of farmers and Revolutionary War veterans that protested the following things. 1, foreclosures, which means banks taking back people's homes because they can't pay the mortgages. 2, high taxes, and 3, imprisonment for debt. This lasts for quite a while, as you can see, from 1786 to 1787. And the most important thing to know about Shays' Rebellion is it showed that the Articles of Confederation were weak. This helped lead to a stronger central government under the Constitution. Couple foreign challenges that you'll need to know. Spain ended the right of deposit in New Orleans, which is the ability of Americans to store goods there, which would help out with trade. Britain was doing all sorts of things. They encouraged Native Americans to attack the U.S. They were participating in impressment, which is the kidnapping of American merchants and forcing them to be in the British Navy. This is a huge cause about 30 years later in the War of 1812. They did not leave their posts, which they said they would under the Treaty of Paris of 1783, and here is Fort Niagara, about 30 minutes from where I'm located. This was a fort they were supposed to abandon, but they didn't. They stayed there. Also, we have some Barbary pirates from Africa who captured ships and demanded ransom. So they would kidnap American merchants and demand that there would be a ransom paid for them before they would be returned. And France was even upset with the U.S. They closed off trade in the West Indies because they demanded the U.S. to repay the loans from the American Revolution. Okay, 2 important conventions to know. The first is the Annapolis Convention. This happens in 1786. Purpose of this was to improve the economy, and only 5 states show up. There are 12 delegates from 5 states that show up. Alexander Hamilton saves the day, gives this very long speech, and he gets a promise. Here's Alexander Hamilton. And he gets a promise for another convention in 1787, the very next year. And this convention would be held in Philadelphia. This turns into what we know as the Constitutional Convention. And in the Constitutional Convention, if you look here, this guy, well, we have a couple guys. Here's Ben Franklin. And over here, standing tall, is George Washington. He was elected president of the convention. Purpose of this was to revise the Articles of Confederation. However, they realized just how difficult that would be, so they scrapped the whole thing and started fresh with a new government, and that government is the Constitution. All right, pretty much everything you need to know about the Articles of Confederation there. I hope that helped. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. If you want to know more about the Constitution, check out my video, APUSH Review the Constitution. And if you have 4 minutes and 27 seconds while you're on YouTube, type this in Lin Manuel. It's this guy's name. He raps about Alexander Hamilton to a bunch of people at the White House, including President Obama. It is one of the coolest things I've ever seen, and plus it's a history rap, so what's better than that? So type in Lin Manuel, 4 minutes and 27 seconds, and enjoy it. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it, and have a good day.